Small. So there has not been a shortage of bones of contention between NASA and Jubilee, or NASA and the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, if you like. And the latest one is the proposed amendments, the election laws amendment bill that is being pushed by Jubilee to change a number of things. And what we do understand is that those amendments are meant to make it almost impossible for another election to be invalidated. Will be knowing if that is indeed the correct point. And NASA and political pundits have accused Jubilee of trying to change the laws midway through the game. Brian, yes. Is Jubilee changing the goalposts, changing the rules?
No, I think I'm glad Parliament has taken leadership in this matter, because what they're doing, they're creating clarity on what the Supreme Court ruled. And in fact, NASA should be happy because they're asking for reforms. These are part of the reforms that we want. You know, one of the accusations was that presiding officers did not stamp or sign the forms. Now the law is making it mandatory for them. And I don't see any reason why they should not sign.
Are you focusing on the small ones?
No, I'll want you to dissect every part that you feel is against the law. But whatever Jubilee is doing is to cure the things that happened and that the Supreme Court had ordered. In most cases, we've seen several rulings, like even on the CDF Act. Parliament was told to create laws to make it in tandem with the Constitution. That's exactly what the Supreme Court fell short of doing, because they said IBC should also put in place a complementary mechanism in case of technology failure. That's what this bill wants to give life to also. So there is no way that we have voted in a certain polling station, 500 people have voted, it has been inscribed in Form 34As, then it's lost in between in the transmission, then you deny the 500 people who voted their voice to be heard. So what the law is saying is that that Form 34A is supreme. Then in the event of anything, you go back to that Form 34A.
All right.
So I'd like anybody challenging that law to pinpoint the exact section of that law that is in contravention of...
Let me pinpoint some clauses of this bill.
Yes.
The Commission shall electronically and manually transmit the tabulated presidential results from a polling station to the constituency level.
Yes.
In case of a dispute between the electronically and the manually transmitted results, then the manual transmitted results shall prevail. Yes. And any failure to transmit or publish the election results in an electronic format shall not invalidate the results.
Yes.
Jared, what is your problem with this?
Firstly, Ben, to date, Jubilee has not accepted that Justice Maraga and company disturbed their illegal victory. That is something they have refused deliberately to admit. You know, when Uhuru won, of course, a win that was still subjected to Supreme Court proceedings, Uhuru Kenyatta became larger than life. Of course, with the ICC case pending on his head, he managed to galvanize, actually single-handedly, the African continent behind him. And of course, you know what happened with the Assembly of State Parties and certain clauses that they wanted changed with the Assembly of State Parties as regards to the conduct of ICC judges. Mm-hmm. So at that point, Uhuru Kenyatta became a very big guy within the African continent and even beyond. And therefore, for 4 judges to sit at the Supreme Court and find him to have transgressed the electoral merchandise.
Not him, find IBC.
Is something that he has refused to accept. Because, of course, this is also an egocentric thing. So he's still not accepting that, you know, as big as I was 4 years ago, touching on, working up around ICC things, 4 judges can sit and vitiate my win. So that is Uhuru's major problem. But remember, Ben, that they have accepted that there were certain illegalities that therefore necessitated the election to be overturned. That they have accepted. So what are they doing now? They are now trying to make those illegalities to be legal. so that even as they plan to rig again on 26th, or when we shall be comfortable to have the election, because 26th is not cast on stone, then they will perpetuate the very ills, pronounce themselves winners, but again it becomes very difficult to disturb that victory, illegal victory. Now you have said that they're saying that the manual transmission will take precedent over the electronic transmission. Now, they know that is where the problem lies. We said categorically that we wanted the servers opened so that we ascertain, firstly, where the results are coming from, and number two, whether indeed they reflect what came from the ground. You know, they know these manual forms can be taken away. They can be disturbed.
We are selling
they
that
can be
now.
invalidated. So they are saying the electronic whereas could be the truth emanating from the ground with Raila Odinga's win, but let us now resort to the manual that has been disturbed by the presiding officer.
Allow me to ask you this, Mheshimiwa. If you as NASA, vis-a-vis your demands, what would you trust more? Because we have seen the electronic system. There are a lot of queries on the electronic system. What would you trust more?
No,
the manual
it's
system
not
or the
about trusting
system?
anything. The decision of Maina Kiai's case was very clear. That once everything is done at the polling station and statutory forms failed, and that is Form 34A, it is actually scanned. And it is that scanned document that is transmitted to bombers electronically. So it is not about trusting what. What these guys are hell-bent on doing, they know that electronic will reflect Raila Odinga's win, and that is why they don't want us to open the server. But now, because they have their own presiding officers and returning officers inclining towards them, they would want to now change that particular form.
Mutinda, what do you think about
and
what
then declare themselves the winners. And that is not something we are not going to accept.
What are the results?
All right, Mutinda,
You know,
what do you think
the
about
truth of
this?
the matter is this, that ideally, whatever is transmitted through electronic and what is brought manually should be in
The same,
agreement.
yes, correct.
That is ideally.
Yes. Correct.
But now, we are looking at a situation where we have a technology failure, such that even some of these polling stations are not even transmitted whatever results they had.
Why?
So the scanners have, sometimes you scan
probably
some things and
technological
get it tough.
challenges. They talked about it. They talked about the issue of 4G, 3G not being available. ABC gave their reasons, although those reasons clearly were not convincing to the Supreme Court. So the interventions by Parliament are trying to clarify some of these gray areas, such that in a case where no results have been submitted electronically, and yet we have the physical forms showing the results, then the physical forms should take a precedent. That is what the issue is, because I actually don't see a big problem. The only problem would arise where the physical forms are having different results from what has been transmitted electronically.
Yes.
That probably would just be the challenge. But if they were in agreement, if what was transmitted using technology and the physical forms were in agreement, I would want to know whether Mheshimiwa would have any problem with that kind of a law that gives precedence to the physical form that is available at the bombers or at the tallying center for that matter.
What many analysts, what many people feel, what I feel is that this bill wants to put more importance on the manually transmitted results, because it says here, in case there's a dispute or failure to transmit or publish the election results electronically, shall not invalidate the results.
Ben, just a quick one. Just a quick one. Ben,
yes.
Service providers have been given a job to do.
Yes.
Safaricom, Airtel, or whichever company. They've been given a job to do, to ensure that, one, they provide adequate infrastructure for transmission of results. That is their job. Now, once a provider has failed, the buck stops with them. Why would Jubilee want to answer questions revolving around the conduct of Safaricom?
It's not Jubilee, by the way, it's the Parliament. What I'm saying is this. What this law want to do is to give precedence to the will of the people. Because whatever is noted down at the polling station, in fact, the results, it's noted down on a physical form. Noted down on this form, and they're saying this form is superior to any other form. Because I can try to scan something, it becomes half of it. You cannot read something that were transmitted, or
but the Elections Act says...
That's why they are That's why they're creating that law to bring clarity. Because Maina Kiai case and Supreme Court...
Probably for clarity's
That's
sake.
a loophole for theft.
For clarity's sake, let's go back to the Maina Kiai rule.
Case, yes.
Let's go back to the Maina Kiai.
That's what brought all this problem.
The Maina Kiai ruling said that whatever result has been pronounced at the polling station is the final result. And of course, the subsequent tally at the constituency level. I think the only problem, again, probably would arise when there is evidence that whatever results that were announced at the polling center or at the constituency after tallying is not what has been brought to the tallying center.
How?
We need
This
to be
is
very
a
clear
scanned document.
Dismas.
Yes. This is a scanned document. I mean, you go to photocopy a document, and you want to claim that the photocopy machine is bringing something else.
But I'm
you never
telling you,
prove.
we are saying is even that scanned document, the one that you are scanning, supersedes whatever. You see, it's the document. You see, you are saying it's a scanned document. You are saying that document you are scanning is supreme.
All right, Dismas, what do you think about this?
Ben, let's look at the purpose of these amendments.
Defending theft is very
in an
difficult.
ideal democracy.
No.
In an ideal democracy,
these guys are suffering
it's
here.
supposed to be bipartisan.
Yes.
That NASA is supposed to be agreeable to this, and Jubilee is supposed to be agreeable to this. Then at that stage, we can use what Mbogo is saying, that it's parliamentary. Right now, it's only Jubilee. Now, when you look at those amendments, they're going to have 3 fundamental effects. Number one, we are going back now to a pure A to Z manual. And it's because of this electronic system that the Supreme Court was able to invalidate this. Now, if these amendments go through, then we are going back to manual. Number two, these amendments serve to create a ceremonial head of the IBC. Because again, those proposals saying that you are going to have 3 commissioners who can sit in a room and take a decision, it means that when the commissioner is seated in a boardroom, if 3 are in disagreement, one can look at the chairman, Mr. Chebukati, and says, I disagree with you. They move to one corner of the boardroom, they take a decision which has got the effect of law. But when you look at all those amendments, the one which makes sense and which we should be uploading the Jubilee Parliamentary Group is the one where they want to criminalize the penal codes, that if you've got a returning officer or a presiding officer who is mischievous, is punished. And if you notice, the last couple of days, that is what is being used for propaganda. Because when Jubilee is going around town, they're saying, we want to criminalize anybody who wants to misbehave. But they're forgetting to say that the effect is going to make this thing manual. If we go back to a manual system, believe you me, this election is going to be stolen. And that's what Kriegler said, that in a manual system in Kenya, you cannot tell who has won the election. You cannot tell who has lost. Because in Kenya, we've got that huge talent, an amazing talent for stealing election. And I'm wondering, when Jubilee knows that these issues are going to raise issues during the conversations, why would they want to form a select committee which is going to be running with people from one thinking? And you know, that's the definition of incest. If you want to have a good amendment, there needs to be cross-pollination between NASA, between Jubilee. But that's not going to take place. And believe you me, if we do not have the technology, we wouldn't have known whether this election was won in the right manner. That's number one. Number two, and probably most important, it's well known, and if you meet Brian in the evening when he's having a cup of coffee, he'll tell you that these amendments, if the president sends them into law, they go to the High Court or Court of Appeal, they're going to be declared null and void. This is not the way. I mean, you cannot start restructuring the Constitution using an act of Parliament. How does this thing... I mean, one begins to wonder whether or not Kavemba and Mbogwa actually listen to lawyers. How do you start changing rules and you want them to be retrospective? Where does that work?
Can I answer that?
Brian.
Let me tell you something, Dimas. Let me tell you something. Number one.
Dismas.
Yeah. It's the role of Parliament to amend laws and make laws to solve real problems. We are having a problem as a country.
Irrespective of the beneficiaries.
Number two, the reason why party toils to have a majority in Parliament is that they can have the agenda sorted. So, otherwise, I could be one member and happy. But the reason why party toils is to have their legislative idea passed. And that's why Jubilee is having a say
consistent with the
Parliament.
public good.
Yes,
consistent with the public
it's okay.
good.
Even in the Supreme Court ruling, it was by the majority.
allow me to explain something these guys don't know.
Number two, on the laws on being retrospective. You know, this is like a civil law. It's not criminal. Criminal law is where that you are charged with stealing and fine is 50,000 increased to 100,000.
Right.
That's why it will not apply to you.
Then
But
allow
in
me
fact,
to
if that
explain
fine is reduced to 25,000, it will apply to you, even if the case is ongoing. So this law is going on to solve real problems. So it's not retrospective. It's not affecting negatively on any
Ben,
issue.
let me explain something.
It's for clarity purposes.
Ben, there's something curious, and it's disturbing that Mr. Chebukati himself, he was cornered at Bomas of Kenya after the walkouts. He said, IBC does not require any more laws, does not require any regulations. If anything, he wants more powers. He wants more powers to tame the secretariat. So one wonders, when Jubilee is coming up with these pieces of amendments, whom have they consulted? Have they spoken with the IBC? As the IBC chairman said that we are unable to function because of these pieces
You know,
of legislation.
Parliament
let's put it
can
clear
pass.
here that the Supreme Court made a ruling.
Yes.
In this country, we have very many institutions. One of them is called Parliament. Parliament, in its own wisdom, saw the need for some interventions so that they can prevent the same scenario that led to the ruling by the Supreme Court.
All right.
And they've moved
Ben, let me
within
explain
to take-
something.
Mutinda, let me
Yes.
ask you this
Yes.
before Jared explains something to us. What is the spirit of Parliament making these laws at this time?
I have just said that the Supreme Court made a ruling. In that ruling, they pointed out some gaps that led them to nullifying the presidential election. In the wisdom of Parliament, and which is within their rights, they saw that some of those gaps can actually be taken care of through legislation. And they've moved towards that direction. That
In a partisan way.
in their own
No,
wisdom.
Parliament,
Parliament.
the way it works.
Parliament. You know, Parliament is also an independent institution for that matter. So they also do their own job. They have their own constitutional mandates. And in case anybody feels like they've done anything wrong, then there's always a recourse in law. You go back to the court. It's not going to be the first time if
All right.
at all it happens. But the thing is, we need to agree that they have a duty also, if they see need for them to have some interventions that are legislative in nature.
All right.
From where I see it, that is what is happening. That from that ruling, the interpretation of that ruling, they felt that as Parliament, they probably also need to move in and legislate to fill some of those gaps that existed and that led to the Supreme Court nullifying the presidential election.
All right, Jared, very quickly as we wind up.
Well, Ben, it's very difficult sitting here listening to Jubilee, especially advancing theories that they don't understand properly. Now, there is a procedure upon which legislative processes must undergo before they become law. And one of them is, of course, they managed to single-handedly change where bills do not necessarily have to take 14 days. They have reduced it to one. So that when we go back on the 10th, there will be the first reading, second reading, third reading, and the same night of 10th, Uhuru will sign it into law.
Yes.
That is fine. That is within their tyranny of numbers.
Application period.
But this is what is most important. All bills, before they are passed, must go before the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. Now, that committee must comprise of both the majority and the minority. At the moment, we as NASA have not presented names of individuals who will sit in various committees. So that in itself, firstly, make that particular committee, I saw them yesterday, being at pains to craft something called Joint Jubilee Parliamentary Committee, drawn from both the Senate and the National Assembly. I want to tell you that that committee is null and void ab initio. So even when there is a bill that will go before them, and they would want to, push using their majority, that is not going to go anywhere. If you read the Constitution properly, Ben, Article 2, Sub-Article 4, it says any law that is inconsistent with the Constitution is null and void. Exactly. And it is to the extent of that inconsistency. So even if they struggle so much, and we have seen this happen before, to craft laws that will then be passed, within a twinkle of an eye. But the moment they go before the Judicial Review Court, they will be overturned. But again, that is why the Chief Justice, and those laws also affect the conduct of judges at the Supreme Court, that Njoki Ndung'u can swear in Uhuru Kenyatta, and that is well captured in those pieces of legislation. But this is what I'm saying. The Chief Justice, in his wisdom, said, we've got no problem. In fact, we are ready to pay the ultimate price. But what must happen is that this must be subjected to a referendum.
All right.
There are certain powers that were given to Parliament to legislate, but there are some that we do not have powers, up to and including the things that they're trying to advance.
No.
Those are your final remarks. I need your final remarks.
You know, first of all, this is not a constitutional amendment, number one. There's nowhere in the Constitution which talks about how Parliament will conduct their business and the number of committees.
Oh, they are there.
It's the
Read
standing
Article
order.
27,
Just
Article
listen.
99,
Just listen.
Article
Just listen.
168.
The first motion that Jubilee passed was procedural now, to reduce those numbers and to form a select committee, which has happened before, even in the Nara era and other areas. So the point is, they set even the number of quorum. So the minority cannot blackmail the majority by refusing to nominate members to the committee. So long as the committee has the quorum, it can proceed.
All right.
You know, the minority cannot cripple the National Assembly. The National Assembly must continue.
Thank you. Mutinda, your final thoughts?
Yes, as we conclude, we need to be governed by the rule of law and the Constitution. On the issues of making demands that certain people need to leave the IEBC. And you know, we like I said, we had Kivuito, he left. We had Isaac Isan, he left. Now there are people who've been pinpointed. It is going to set a very dangerous precedent where these members of the independent constitutions are going to be paying attention to not annoying certain personalities in Kenya other than sticking to what is in the law and in the Constitution. That is my main fear. And now that the DPP has already gone public, that he has written to the relevant investigative arms to go into IEBC and establish individual culpability, I think it is in the interest of the spirit of the rule of law for us to wait for those reports so that whatever action is going to be taken is evidence-based as per the findings of those relevant investigative authorities, not witch hunt. Because when it gets to a point that it is known that a certain individual says Kavemba must go, it doesn't matter what, Kavemba must go. It is just going to be a matter of time that Kenyans will get into those offices, and what will be behind their mind is to ensure they don't do anything that is going to annoy these personalities that have the power to make them go, irrespective of whether they were right or wrong.
All right, thank you. Dismas?
Well, Ben, in my view, Kenya as a nation, we must run away from the culture of deceit and mischief. The high appetite for mischief we must run away with. Now, as far as IBC concerned, it's now for Mr. Chebukati to realize that Kenya's position as a going concern actually depends on him. Because NASA is going to make a lot of noise, Jubilee is going to make a lot of noise, civil society and everybody. But now the buck stops with him. If for some reason he's unable to kick out Chiloba, he must quickly invite the DPP to come and kick him out so that he restructures the team. We go to an election which is free, fair, and credible. Because if it doesn't do that, then we'll no longer be talking about nation Kenya. We'll be talking about a chapter in history books.
Thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen. Political risk analyst Dismas Mokua, political strategist Brian Bogua, and Mutinda Kavemba, and member of parliament for Nyando constituency, Jared Okello. Thank you so much for your for coming to share your perspectives on these issues of national importance. And so we leave it on this week's edition of Sunday Edition. Let's do this again next week, same time, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. A big story. The big stories involving or revolving around the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, NASA maintaining that they will not go to the elections until their demands are met, calling for more protests Monday and Friday. IEBC under massive pressure from both sides of the political divide. Jubilee moving very quickly to pass some amendments to the electoral laws that not going down very well to their nemesis, to their counterparts in NASA. We'll just wait and see how that continues to play. Stay with KTN News for the most complete coverage of all these political stories for it. Remember, today is exactly 25 days to the October 26th presidential repeat election. That's why we leave it. I'm Ben Kiteli for all of us here on the program. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.